I've really been enjoying using the new bin/dev script that comes as part of Rails 7 and the CSS bundling Rails gem. And I figured it'd be helpful just to create a quick video to do this with Rails 6, or maybe you don't need the CSS bundling Rails gem and you just want to get your local setup a little bit easier to get going. My hope is that you can do a git clone and then a bin setup and then a bin dev, and you should be up and running with your application locally, whether that's a new application or a new team member that needs to get up and running on something. So the bin/dev script is just utilizing the foreman, which is a simple process manager. You might be familiar with this from Heroku, which then just points at a proc file, and that proc file lists out the things that your application needs to run and boot up locally. So let's go ahead and get going. I have this app called Phoenix Brief. It's a simple blog application, just basically stores blog posts and has a MySQL backend. It's a Rails 5 or 6 application, and we can go ahead and get this going within here because I want to migrate it over onto DigitalOcean from Heroku anyways. We do have a proc file in here already. This proc file is currently for Heroku. So you can see we boot up the web. We already have a database connection configured within Heroku. And then when we run that release break db migrate process. So we're actually going to use a dedicated procfile.dev file, which is specifically a proc file for your development environment so that you can boot up your development dependencies for your application. So I just copied this from an existing application that I've been working on. And so I'm going to simplify this a little bit because we don't have a worker process right now that we need. But if you did, you could utilize something like this for Sidekick, or if you have Tailwind, you could utilize, the CSS process for that. So we're just going to use web and then boot up Puma, boot it on 3001. You could also pass an environment variable here, and then you can pass that when you run the bin/dev script to get that pointed to that port instead. So with our procfile.dev and file in place, we can go ahead and add our bin/dev file. And our bin/dev file, I'm going to go ahead and also grab this from another application that I've been working on. And it's pretty much the same as what you get with a new Rails application, but you can see it's just a simple shell script that looks for foreman to see if it exists, and then goes ahead and installs it if it doesn't. I have Docker Compose up in here, and this is what I usually use to boot up the backing services such as MySQL, Postgres, Redis, Elasticsearch. I'm actually going to move this to that procfile.dev, so I'm going to remove that from this file for now. And then the last line in this bin/dev is that foreman start. You point at that new procfile.dev that you just created. And then as you remember, the procfile.dev did have a web worker and a CSS process that you could boot up. We're actually just going to remove all of these because the default is to boot everything in that proc file. But this would be a way to basically say boot the web process and the CSS, but don't boot the worker, just for future reference. So let's go ahead and remove that. And then now that we have that in place, let's go ahead and give this permission to run. And then now we should basically have, when we boot up this proc file, we'll have just the regular Rails S process that you're kind of used to running. So bin/dev, you can see, okay, there's Puma running on 3001, great. So then we can go over here and we can see, okay, all right, cool, it booted. But now you can see it's not able to connect to MySQL, which is expected because we haven't set up that connection. So let's go ahead and kill this bin dev and with a Control C, and we're out of that. And so then now we just need to add, I'm going to use Docker Compose for this, and you can just add Docker Compose.MySQL, which also obviously assumes that you do have a Docker Compose.yaml file in here, which I do already. And so within here, you're just defining a service that's MySQL. We're running on MySQL 8. It's going to go ahead and bind to 3306 outside and inside of the container. And then the environment that we're passing in is we're going to give it a root password so that when we go ahead and utilize this database connection within our database.yaml, it matches this username and password, and we already have our database name in there as well. So let's go ahead and boot that back up and see what happens. So there you can see there's new yellow lines that might not be yellow for you, but for the database, and it's booting up the whole MySQL process. And so the very end, you'll see this ready for connections, version E032, connected on MySQL D. And so now we can go ahead and refresh our app here. And so next step would be there's no database. So that's just as simple as we'll go ahead and run a bin setup, which is one of your pretty standard Rails scripts to get this going. And this line that we're specifically utilizing is this RakeDB setup. So now you can see, okay, we created all of the tables that we need in the database. And now we're up and running with our application locally. And it's as simple as a git clone, and then a bin setup, and then a bin dev. Let's go ahead and just make a quick change just to kind of show that you can make some quick changes right away. And so there you can see I just added in that back in that shows link, which I'd had removed. So hopefully this is helpful for your team, and this is a good way to get all of your applications up and running locally and as simple as a git clone, bin setup, bin dev. That way, when you're hopping back and forth between applications or you need to learn how to use a new application, it's all kind of the same process. It's those scripts to rule them all to get it going for your team. So see ya.